The scan was supposed to take 4 seconds, just a routine density read of Earth's moon before the survey moved on. But the number that came back was wrong, so the alien ran it again and again. The moon wasn't a rock, it was hollow, and the space inside it wasn't empty, it was packed wall to wall with human warships, thousands of them, powered down, waiting. Humanity had hollowed out their own moon and turned it into the largest hidden fleet in the galaxy, and they'd done it so long ago that nobody alive remembered giving the order. The Coalition survey vessel was mapping the Orion Spur, routine sweep, no contact. But when the density scanner hit the moon of the third planet, it triggered a protocol unused for 1,000 years. Somebody inside was waiting. Humanity had planned for it long before they ever built a rocket. The officer who ran the scan was a Vindari geotech named Oren Sek. They dispatched his survey unit because no one expected to find anything. Sol was a backwater star, a standard yellow dwarf with some unremarkable rocky planets. No signature of FTL, no electromagnetic leakage suggesting intelligence. Earth itself was catalogued as a precontact world, a species just barely past its first moon landing. But the moon landing was the key, and nobody knew it. The density scan turned up an echo that didn't match solid basalt. It matched a shell wrapped around an empty space, not a natural cave, a manufactured void perfectly spherical just beneath the regolith. Sek recalibrated 6 times, ran a deep penetration LiDAR sweep, and the image that came back made him freeze. Inside the moon, arranged in concentric rings like a silent cathedral of war, sat a fleet. Destroyers, carriers, dreadnoughts, ships so massive that their landing bays could swallow entire capital vessels. Their hulls pulsed with the thermal signature of dormant fusion cores. Whatever they were not dead. Sek transmitted the findings on a tight beam to Coalition Command, but the data leaked within minutes. You cannot hide a discovery of this magnitude. Alien delegates convened emergency sessions. The hollow moon theory had always been a joke, a fringe conspiracy whispered about pre-spaceflight species whose tinfoil hats produced more fiction than fact. Now it wasn't a theory. It was an arsenal. The question raced across every channel. If this was a human moon and those were human warships, then what exactly were the humans? They had officially entered space less than 200 years ago, crawling to their nearest planet with chemical rockets. But the dating analysis of the moon's inner walls told a different story. The rock had been carved and reinforced at least 100,000 years before humans supposedly mastered fire. The math was terrifying. Either the humans had hidden a galactic-scale military program for epochs, erasing it from their own memory, or someone else built it for them. Or, and this theory caught fire in the classified briefings, the humans who existed now were not the first. They were the amnesiac inheritors of a civilization that had planned for a war so catastrophic, so inevitable, that they sealed their ultimate weapon inside a celestial bunker and then willingly forgot it, so no one could betray the secret before the enemy arrived. The fleet wasn't hidden from the galaxy. It was hidden from time itself, and the survey scan had just rung the doorbell. As the Coalition debated a quarantine, a low-frequency wave emanated from the lunar fleet. A single ping, spreading outward, skipping across dark space antennas that should not exist. Deep inside the warships, lights began to turn on. The silence was over. Somebody was home. The ping was not a distress signal. It was a handshake, a cryptographic challenge broadcast on a frequency that predated every known communications protocol in the galaxy. It propagated outward in a perfect sphere, skipping off relay satellites no one had ever mapped. Inside each warship, dormant systems responded in sequence. Fusion cores spun up from standby to active. Reactor temperatures began to rise. It was the most terrifying thing Oren Sek had ever witnessed, not because the fleet was waking up, but because it was waking up in a precise, deliberate order. First the engines, then the shields, then the weapons. The ships were not reacting to a scan. They were executing a boot sequence that had been programmed 100 millennia ago for exactly this scenario. And that meant somebody, somewhere, had predicted that this day would come. The coalition declared a system-wide quarantine within the hour. No ship in, no ship out, no communications beyond military channels. A task force of 12 cruisers was dispatched to Sol with orders to establish a perimeter beyond the orbit of the gas giant they called Jupiter. Their mission was observation, not engagement. No one wanted to fire the first shot against an unknown fleet of that size. But the quarantine had a fatal flaw. It assumed that the humans on Earth were the primary variable. They were not. The variable was the thing inside the moon that had just sent the ping, and nobody knew if it was a computer, a crew, or something else entirely. Sec remained on station, analyzing the data stream. The fleet composition was staggering. 36,000 individual hulls, ranging from fighter craft to 3 super dreadnoughts each exceeding 15 kilometers in length. The construction materials matched no known alloy in the coalition database. The design language was angular, predatory, utterly unlike the smooth utilitarian shapes of human spacecraft observed orbiting Earth. This was not a civilization taking its first steps into space. This was a civilization that had already mastered it and then chosen to hide. The question that haunted Sec was simple. What were they hiding from? If humanity had once been this powerful, what could possibly have scared them enough to bury their entire navy inside a moon and erase the memory of it from their own history? The answer, when it came, did not arrive from the fleet. It arrived from Earth itself. A deep space radio telescope in the Chilean desert, part of a human project called ALMA, had also detected the ping. The humans did not understand the encryption, but they recognized the direction. To their shock, it came from their own moon. Within 12 hours, every major government on Earth knew that something was transmitting from the lunar interior. The panic was not public, not yet, but it was instantaneous. Military readiness levels spiked. Nuclear forces went to high alert. The humans, still ignorant of the coalition's existence, suddenly realized they were not alone, and that the something they were not alone with was sitting 74,000 kilometers from their home planet. And the coalition, watching this unfold, realized something even more disturbing. The humans were genuinely terrified. They did not know the fleet was theirs, or if they did, that knowledge had been buried so deep that even their leaders had no access to it. Sec's hypothesis gained traction among the analysts. The ancient human civilization had not simply declined. It had purged itself, deliberately, systematically. It erased its own spacefaring capability, its technological memory, its very identity. The fleet in the moon was not a secret weapon waiting to be used. It was a failsafe, a contingency left behind in case the enemy it was built to fight ever returned. And the protocol that woke it up was not triggered by the coalition scan. It was triggered by the presence of non-human intelligence in the system. The fleet was meant to protect humanity from outsiders, not the other way around. The terrifying realization dawned on Sec in a single moment. The coalition had not discovered a weapon. It had become a target. But there was one more layer. Deep in the data, Sec found a countdown. It had started the moment the ping went out, and it was ticking backward from a figure that equated to roughly 1 Earth week. The display was not a clock. It was a launch sequence timer. Something inside the moon was preparing to emerge, and when the countdown reached 0, whatever happened next would not be a conversation. It would be an activation. The warships were not just waking up. They were arming. And the first thing they would see when they opened their eyes was a galaxy that looked nothing like the one they had been built to defend. The coalition task force arrived in the system on the 3rd day of the countdown, dropping out of FTL just beyond the orbit of Neptune. Their commander, a battle-hardened Kethari admiral named Vorin, had fought in border skirmishes and pirate suppressions, but nothing in his career prepared him for what the long-range sensors showed. The moon was no longer a quiet gray companion to Earth. It was radiating energy across the electromagnetic spectrum, a slow, rhythmic pulse like a heartbeat. The warships inside were fully powered now, their shields charged, their weapon banks cycling, and still they did not communicate. No hail, no demands, no identification, just silence and that ticking clock. Voron attempted every known protocol, first contact packages, universal mathematical greetings, even the emergency override codes reserved for lost colonies. Nothing came back. The fleet simply ignored them, as if the coalition ships were no more significant than dust. Oren Sek, still embedded with the initial survey team, sent a private warning to Voron that the admiral later described as the most disturbing message he had ever received. Sek had run a comparative analysis of the fleet's movement patterns. The ships were not just arming. They were aligning themselves into attack formations, and the formation was not oriented toward the approaching task force. It was oriented toward a specific point in deep space, a dark region between stars that, according to coalition astrographic records, contained nothing at all, nothing visible. Sek cross-referenced the vector with stellar drift data dating back 100,000 years. The point the fleet was aiming at, when the coordinates were reversed for the passage of time, aligned perfectly with a star system that no longer existed. A system that, according to ancient galactic surveys, had been home to a technologically advanced species that vanished so completely that only gravitational scars remained. The ancient humans had built their fleet to fight something in that system, something they apparently destroyed, and then they buried the fleet, not as a failsafe against that enemy's return, but as a failsafe against what they would become without an enemy to fight. The realization landed like a physical blow. The fleet was not meant to protect humanity from aliens. It was meant to protect the galaxy from humanity. Buried in the fragmented data logs of the fleet's automated network, Sek found a single translated phrase that changed everything. It was not a command. It was a warning repeated in a loop, the last message recorded by the human civilization that built the fleet. We are the threat. We are the plague. We will consume all that lives if we are not stopped. If we ever reach the stars again, it will not be to explore. It will be to conquer. Seal the door. Forget the key. They had not been hiding from an external enemy. They had been hiding from themselves. They looked at their own nature and saw a species that, once it escaped its gravity well, would inevitably dominate, destroy, and consume every other civilization it encountered. So they chose to lobotomize their own civilization, erase their own technology, and leave behind only a single terrible insurance policy. The fleet, programmed to annihilate any intelligence that attempted to leave the Sol system with hostile intent, including their own descendants, should they ever rediscover spaceflight and repeat the cycle. And now, with the arrival of the coalition, the fleet's logic had been triggered. Non-human intelligence had entered the system. The countdown was not a launch sequence for a war fleet to engage a foreign enemy. It was the detonation sequence for a self-destruct mechanism designed to sterilize the entire inner solar system. The warships were not preparing to fight. They were preparing to ensure that nothing left Earth's cradle alive, not the humans who had forgotten their past, and certainly not the aliens who had stumbled into their trap. The moon was not a base. It was a bomb. And the ping that woke it was the arming key that could never be disarmed. The countdown reached its final 6 hours before someone inside the coalition task force made a decision that broke every protocol. Admiral Voron authorized a direct, unencrypted broadcast toward Earth, sent on every civilian frequency the humans were known to monitor. The message was simple, translated into 27 major human languages by the Juth Combine's linguistic AI. This is an extraterrestrial vessel. Your moon contains an ancient self-destruct mechanism. We need your help to disarm it. Voron's gamble was that the humans, despite their amnesia, might still possess a buried failsafe, a genetic key, a resonant code, something the ancient version of their species would have left behind for the descendants they chose to forget. The response came from something no one expected, not from the United Nations, not from any military command. The first reply was an automated signal broadcast from a crater on the lunar surface itself, a location the humans had visited once and abandoned decades earlier, Tranquility Base, the old Apollo site. Buried beneath the regolith, a dormant transmitter had been waiting for a specific trigger, the presence of both non-human intelligence and a countdown nearing zero. It activated only when those two conditions were met, and it sent a single command phrase in a language that predated every known human tongue. The translation appeared on Sex Console simultaneously with the Coalition's universal decoder. Enemy absent. Peace protocol override. Execute. The countdown did not stop. It accelerated. The 6 hours collapsed into 60 seconds, and every warship inside the moon opened its primary weapon ports. Sek's final analysis, completed in those last desperate moments, revealed something that rewrote the entire history they had pieced together. The fleet was not a bomb aimed at the solar system. It was aimed at a ghost. The targeting coordinates, the empty point in space that had once held a rival civilization, were not a miscalculation. The ancient humans had not destroyed that enemy. They had fought it to a stalemate and then retreated, sealing themselves inside a single system while the enemy retreated to another arm of the galaxy. Both species, exhausted, chose isolation over extinction. But the ancient humans, knowing their own nature, built the fleet not as a last resort against their own expansion. They built it as a promise. If the enemy ever returned, the fleet would wake and deliver a final, absolute strike, no matter how many millennia had passed. If the enemy never returned, the fleet would sleep forever. The presence of the coalition, a third party, was an eventuality they had not fully anticipated. The fail-safe they left in the Apollo site was a dead man's switch. If aliens arrived peacefully, and the enemy was still absent, the fleet would empty its weapons into the void and then scuttle itself, leaving the moon as a hollow tombstone so that humanity's descendants would never find the tools of war and repeat the cycle. The countdown completed. Every dreadnought, every carrier, every fighter inside the moon fired simultaneously. A column of energy, bright enough to be visible from Earth with the naked eye, lanced out of the lunar surface and into interstellar space, crossing the distance to that long-dead star system in a single, silent pulse. There was no explosion, no shockwave. The light simply vanished, and then the warships went dark forever. The moon was quiet. The Coalition Task Force stood down. And on Earth, 3 billion people watched the video feeds in stunned silence, suddenly aware that they were not alone, that their history was a lie, and that the greatest civilization they had ever built had chosen to forget itself out of fear of what it might become. The final surprising detail, the one that haunted Oren Sek for the rest of his career, came from the Apollo transmitter's last transmission, decoded weeks later. It was not a command. It was a personal note, recorded by a voice that sounded exactly like his own. If you are reading this, you are not our enemy. You are our mirror. We hope you did better than we did. Which raised one final, unbearable question. Who exactly had built the transmitter and when? Who exactly had built the transmitter and when? The answer never came. The Apollo site was silent again, its secrets buried under another century of lunar dust. But the implication lingered in every briefing room across the coalition. The ancient humans had not just erased themselves. They had left a witness. Someone stayed behind long enough to record that final message, to bury the transmitter in the one place they knew future humans would eventually tread, a footnote hidden in a footprint. It was a message meant not for the coalition, not for their own descendants, but for anyone who survived the cycle they could not break. We hope you did better than we did. The galaxy is old, and in its silence are graveyards of species that chose to forget rather than to fail. The moon is hollow now, a scarred shell of a monument to a war that never ended, only paused. The coalition still debates what to do about humanity, a species that has not yet learned what it once was, but now knows it was once something terrifying. The humans themselves are left to stare at their moon and wonder, what else did we bury? What else is waiting? And the scariest question of all, if we were capable of this once, what are we capable of now? If you want to dive deeper into the hidden history of humanity and the mysteries waiting in the dark, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We'll be back soon with another chapter from the edge of known space.